Mendocino Council of Governments meeting to order, and we're going to reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, immediately recess as Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. Can we have a roll call?
Director Jim Brown.
Here.
Director Greta Connie.
Here.
Director Scott Ignacio. Director Tess Alvin Smith.
Here.
Director John Haschak.
Here.
Director Tasha Alstrom.
Here.
And Chair Dan Drury.
Here. Okay, next on our agenda is public expression. Do we have any members of the public who would like to address the board on items not on the agenda? Go ahead, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Can you hear me out there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm Tom Murphy from the Walhalla Municipal Advisory Council, or GMAC. 4 months have passed since our council urged MCOG to expedite our streetscape project by adopting the basic design concept. MCOG then asked for an action item on it as soon as Caltrans could complete assessment of 3 minor tweaks. GMAC was created by the county to gather community input and advise relevant agencies. Accordingly, GMAC immediately invited Caltrans to discuss the 3 questions, but got no reply. So GMAC independently assessed the items. On May 5th. We unanimously approved 2 that had been discussed for many years and objected to a 3rd that would grossly violate our town plan, county ordinances, local coastal plan, by adding serious safety hazards while creating an eyesore at the scenic southern gateway to Mendocino County. Our volunteer council shared that with Caltrans and asked to meet again, but was told the $26 billion agency lacked staff and money. Caltrans said its review would start in July and should be done by late summer for today's MCOG meeting. But recently we learned the report date slipped to October and then December. We also learned Caltrans might start another round of community input. Mind you, Caltrans just led a very divisive debate in our community that yielded little new, but delayed construction by 2 years until 2026. We don't need to repeat that cycle. After a quarter century of community discussion, GMAC is expert on this project's design concept, which is the core element of our town plan. GMAC has approved 4 alternatives proposed by Caltrans. One includes the ideas Caltrans raised in April. That one was also supported in a GMAC survey by 89% of our local residents, by 1,665 people who signed a petition, and by MCOG in its 2012 interim constraint plan. Please urge Caltrans to finalize the basic Walhalla concept immediately with GMAC's help and help bring it to MCOG for action by October without any additional STIP funds or preliminary concept or recirculation of the concept. Let's move on to funding engineering and construction. CEQA section 15073.5 Part C, sections 3 and 4 clearly state plans don't need to be recirculated unless there are significant changes, and as noted earlier, only insignificant tweaks remain. A few people with financial conflicts will always raise protests after all else is settled, but further delay would be an abusive process that will cost time, money, and leave our residents in danger. One resident recently sustained permanent brain damage in an accident due to a lack of a left turn lane. It's just a matter of time until someone is killed. I'd be happy to review this in detail with any MCOG member, but the bottom line is it's past time to adopt the basic concept and move on. Sorry to rush, but 3 minutes is short. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Murphy. Do we have any other public comments on non-agenda items? Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Well, then we'll go on to our regular agenda, which is presentation of the California Active Transportation Plan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So my name is Alexis Kelso. I'm a transportation planner with Caltrans District 1. So thank you for having me here today to discuss the draft District 1 Active Transportation Plan. I'll be covering 4 key points today. One is the purpose of the District 1 Active Transportation Plan. 2 is to provide an overview of the data-driven needs analysis and results. 3 is to report on our public engagement process. And 4, where to find the draft plan and how to provide comments. So the purpose of the District 1 Active Transportation Plan is to identify bicycle and pedestrian needs on the state highway system in the 4 counties that District 1 serves, which are Del Norte, Humboldt, Lake, and Mendocino. So there's 12 Caltrans districts across the state, and each district is developing their own plan. So much of the planning process is standardized for consistency across the state, which allows us to comprehensively understand the needs and set targets for improvements. There are some things that we were able to customize to address the context of the communities in District 1, and we made those adjustments with our technical advisory group. Nephili and Loretta have been participating in that group, so thank you to them for their time and input. We use data such as speed limits, average daily traffic.
Excuse me, Alexis. So somebody is not muted who's speaking in the background. I don't know if it's Mendocino County or James. So if they could just mute themselves, it'd be great.
Okay, so we use data such as speed limits, average daily traffic, and existing pedestrian or bicycle facilities to conduct a data-driven needs analysis. And through that process, 8 types of needs were identified. So first are Main Street sidewalk gaps. The Technical Advisory Committee helped us identify main streets, which are where the highway passes through communities with many destinations like businesses and residences. So main streets are always at-grade highways and don't include freeways. So main streets that were missing sidewalks were identified as having a sidewalk gap. Then 2, inter-community connector needs. The tag also helped us identify inter-community connectors, which are highway segments that are not within towns like main streets are, but that provide an important connection between towns or maybe to more residential areas on the outskirts of towns. So they're usually on the edges of main street areas or between communities that are relatively close to each other. In these locations, you would expect more walking and biking than on the highway in very rural areas, but they might not need full main street style facilities. 3, areas with existing sidewalks in fair or poor condition are identified as needing improvement to bring them up to good condition. And then 4, in areas where sidewalk is adjacent to highways where the speed limit is 35 miles an hour or greater, are identified as potentially needing more separation from traffic to make it comfortable to walk there. 5, stressful pedestrian and bicycle crossings were identified where conditions like the speed of traffic or the number of lanes and the lack of infrastructure make it stressful or difficult to cross the road. 6, bicyclists are allowed on all state highways in District 1, so locations where speeds or lack of facilities make bicycling stressful were identified as needing lower stress facilities. 7, freeway crossing needs were identified. These are existing over or under crossings or where on and off ramps connect to the local road. So needs here could be things like bike lanes, sidewalks, or crosswalks. And then lastly, freeway barriers. So these are areas that have freeways, but no crossings, but a crossing could increase the bike and pedestrian connectivity. So in addition to the data-driven needs, we invited the public and our transportation planning partners to identify needs. And this was mostly done by completing an online map-based survey. Our technical advisory group included multiple people from each county, and members are typically regional transportation planning agency staff, pedestrian and bicycle advocates, transit providers, or local agency staff. So they helped us with a lot of the decisions that we made to tailor the plan to District 1, where we had those options. They helped us with things like the previously mentioned Main Street and inter-community connector designations. They also directed us on outreach, make sure that we're reaching the right groups in all these different communities. and they played a big role in setting the performance measures used in prioritization. So with our technical advisory group, we developed a public engagement plan, and the goals of which were really focused on reaching underserved communities. So we compiled a long list of community-based organizations and others that we thought might be interested in the plan. And then we emailed and called those groups, asking them to take the survey and share the information. So the results of these efforts were that we had over 450 people complete the survey, identifying over 1,400 needs, and that we were specifically reaching out to mostly underserved communities or organizations that work with them. Only 25% of respondents identified as a race or ethnicity other than white alone, and only 31% of people reported a household income of less than $50,000 per year. So for comparison, around 30 to 40% of the district is not white alone, and about 50% of households have income less than $50,000. I think our outreach, is occurring entirely during 2020. So doing in-person outreach was difficult, which is a mechanism that we would have otherwise used extensively to reach these groups. But the survey, even though the draft plan is released, the survey is still open for people to identify needs. So it's at survey.catplan.org, or people can also leave comments on UC Berkeley Street Story Tool, which I know has been used in Walla to support the active transportation program application. And these two map-based surveys are really similar, and they'll both get reviewed during project initiation by Caltrans. So it doesn't really matter to us which one, if you're thinking of one to promote, pick whichever one works better for you. So the main reason I'm here specifically now is to let you know that our draft plan has been posted for public comment just this morning, actually. There are two parts to the plan. The summary report is a pretty standard PDF document, provides an overview of the planning process and some key context and findings. And then the companion piece is a story map, which is entirely online and provides an opportunity to view and interact with a series of maps that explain the existing conditions and findings. A little bit more about what you can expect to find in the summary report. The key terms, purpose, and overview of the plan are pretty similar text statewide, but the remaining sections are more tailored to District 1. The public engagement section is informed by our public engagement plan and reports on the performance and findings. And then walking and biking in District 1 today describes some of the most important existing conditions that contribute to the safety and comfort of people walking and biking. The needs for people walking and biking section describes how the data-driven needs were identified, like what I went over in the presentation earlier. And then the next steps give some good information on how we're going to use the plan and what comes next in implementation. The story map is where you can really visualize the existing conditions and findings. So this is entirely online, not really something that you can print out like a PDF. So I wanted to provide a little navigation information in case you're not familiar with story maps. So first, you can quickly navigate between sections by clicking the headings on the top. The map and content change as you scroll down the page. So as you scroll, you'll first see a text box describing the map that you're looking at. And then if you keep scrolling, the legend for that map will appear. And you can zoom into and out of the map by using the plus and minus signs on the bottom of the page. And you can move around the map by clicking and dragging. And then the very last map on the story map is the Explore map. And this map contains all of the data. So every single item that went into the analysis and all of the outputs. You can view this map in the story map webpage, but I find it's easier to open as a standalone page using the box in upper right. And then you click on layers to open up all the options and dive into whatever you're interested in. So next steps. I posted the links to the story map and the summary report on our webpage this morning. Comments are due September 3rd to me, and then I'll be compiling all the comments and sending them to our consultants. And we expect the final plan to be released in the last week of October. We've been working on this since May of last year, so it's pretty exciting to be at this point. We'd love your help in reviewing the draft and sharing it with your communities. So there's that fact sheet in your packet that you can share via email or print it out if you have a community bulletin board or anything like that that you can post it on. And I'm also happy to meet with any groups and give this presentation to them or hear their concerns directly. So let me know if you have any recommendations for that. And then lastly, this presentation is posted on our webpage if you want to refer back to these slides. And here's my contact info. So thank you very much for hearing my presentation this afternoon.
All right. Well, thank you, Alexis. Do we have any questions about the program? Supervisor Hash?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Director Hashak.
Well, thank you, Chair Dirty. Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation. It seems like something that can provide a lot of good information about this. I was just wondering, like Mr. Murphy, who made those comments about the Gualala, plans, and where we are with those. If it's appropriate to ask at this point, where we are as MCOG with those and Caltrans.
So let me start responding to that. I don't know if Alexis might be able to respond to that at all, but I will just start. It actually might be better. We have another item on the agenda later, a discussion on the 2022 RTIP. And because the Gualala project is an RTIP project, it might be appropriate to discuss that somewhat under that item. There is funding in there regarding that project. I don't know how, because it was under public expression, because that particular comment was under public expression, I don't know how much we can, how much Brown Act allows us to discuss that. Was this, well, maybe a question for Alexis, was the Gualala streetscape identified in the CAT plan?
It was in the sense that like the needs are identified, but the CAT plan doesn't identify projects or provide recommendations to address particular needs. So you might not recognize it as the streetscape project.
Okay. So my suggestion would be that we discuss this when we get to that project, when we get to the RTIP item.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And then Alexis, is it possible, I don't know if you're prepared, I know the draft was just released today, but is it possible for you to share just some highlights of the needs that were identified in Mendocino County? Sorry to put you on the spot. If not, that's okay. We'll take a look at the draft.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare that.
Okay, that's okay.
So, Alexis, I have a question. Is the CAT survey, is this a new survey by Caltrans? I just don't remember seeing this before.
It's been, we were promoting it more around October through the end of the year last year. So
I believe it's been, we've maybe provided some information at a board meeting last fall, just that there was availability of the survey.
Yeah, so I guess my question is this the first year that this survey's been done?
yes. So the 12 districts in Caltrans are each developing their own plan, and they're kind of on like this rolling schedule where a couple districts are going at once. So it might have started in 2019, like around the end of 2019, but it's gonna stay open until all of the districts finish. But yes, that would have been the first. It's the first time we've used this survey is in this statewide planning effort.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I think it's a worthwhile effort to get public input.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay, I'm not seeing it. Do we have any public comment on this item? Okay, great. Well, then I guess we will go on to item number 6, which is the Transit Productivity Committee recommendations of April 26th.
Before we move on, let me just mention to board members. So like Alexis mentioned, the draft just came out today. So staff will be reviewing it and submitting comments. Board members are welcome to review it and submit their own comments. But if you would like staff to include those comments, please contact us. I would say since comments are due by September 3rd, by the end of next week, and then we can incorporate the comments that we receive in our staff comments.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Alexis. Okay, for item number 6 for the Transit Productivity Committee meeting, who has this one?
I'll start with 6A. And I'd like to report out from the April meeting of the Transit Productivity Committee. You have my written staff report. At that meeting, the committee took care of its annual business, and we reported on the budget-related items in June and the unmet needs finding recommendation that was acted on at the June meeting. And now that we have a little more time and breathing room, I'd like to report out the rest of the recommendations made by the committee. So those were 3 items that all are related to developing unmet transit needs to become reasonable to meet and to help those along, and some ideas that the committee had for that. So one of them was that MCOG further study that the board of directors support further study through this Caltrans planning grant proposal that was submitted and in fact was awarded a grant. So that's a step forward. And that was to address mobility solutions for remote communities. It's a long-standing problem, and this would has identified several communities, including Brook Trails, Potter Valley, Covelo, and Laytonville, the inland communities for the most part. And so that those are needs that keep appearing and did appear this year in the annual cycle on the unmet transit needs list, but were not found reasonable to meet. So that is a study that will be undertaken starting this fiscal year to try to find some innovative solutions. So we're asking for support for that. The second one was for MTA staff to research opportunities with other partners such as Adventist Health, in particular as to work with hospitals on non-emergency medical transportation, some of those trips. So that is something for Mendocino Transit Authority to work on, and that they already have been working on. And the third one was recommending that MCOG staff work with Walk and Bike Mendocino, a local nonprofit, to research clean mobility grants for bikes and scooters. And that's because bikes and scooters came up on the unmet needs list, but it's not considered a transit need. It doesn't deal with a transit route in particular. But in the discussion of that item, I'll go back to my April minutes here, it was noted that this form of transportation could help to meet, first and last mile needs, to and from bus stops, for instance. And there was some discussion around that, how Mendocino Transit Authority is not really the right kind of organization to take on a project such as was discussed in terms of bike sharing and a service like that. So that is the last one, and we're just looking for some discussion or direction of that item, and maybe just the board's blessing on doing these things. So that is the recommended action to support that Caltrans Sustainable Communities Planning Grant that we've been awarded. That begins in September, and direct staff to work with Walk and Bike Mendocino. I think we would just reach out and see what their interest is and if they have further ideas on that. To look into what kind of grants or opportunities there are to develop some kind of bike sharing system. Any questions?
Well, thanks, Janet. I agree. There are some small communities in America that now have bike sharing systems, and it seems possible that it could work in Mendocino County, perhaps at least in Ukiah and Fort Bragg, maybe Willits as well, on some limited basis if the cost of operations are kept low. But I hope we could keep pursuing that. Any other questions or comments?
One thing I ought to mention also is that in the discussion at the April committee discussion, it was noted that this bike and scooter issue could be also addressed as part of the grant work scope, as some part of the exploration of innovative solutions for these remote communities.
Well, whenever I have a chance, I'm going to vote yes on that. So I hope we can keep that going. I don't know what the timing is, but I'd love to see that happen.
I think that what we ultimately concluded was that because this particular grant that I know Loretta is going to be talking more about later on the agenda, it's focused on the more remote communities like Round Valley and Potter Valley, for instance, that wouldn't necessarily be as good a fit for this micromobility type project that Janet is talking about. So it probably wouldn't be best to do it through that grant. But we do have in our planning work program, we have some work elements where we'll be able to work on that.
Yeah, that's true. We do have this work element for multimodal. What's that called?
We have multimodal transportation, and then we also have the sustainable transportation. So it could fit in either of those focus areas.
Right. So in either of those areas, it would be appropriate for staff to pursue that.
Okay, Janet, are you looking for direction right now, or do you want to continue on?
Well, we just kind of wanted to see if the board wanted to weigh in on that. Assume that in the absence of any objection, we would go forward with these ideas. So if you'd like to basically put your blessing on that, we'll go forward.
And Director Brown?
Yeah, I will move staff's recommendation as presented in the staff report. I don't have it in front of me, but I read it. And so staff's recommendation, I make a motion.
And I would second it.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on this item? Loretta, were you raising your hand?
I was, and I'll just note, in addition to your motion, on a separate item on today's agenda, you will be asked to amend in the grant project into the work program. So if you vote to do that, that will be also expressing your support for that grant.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can we have a roll call?
Director Brown?
Yes.
Director Connie?
Yes.
Director Alban-Smith?
Yes.
Director Haschak?
Yes.
Director Alstron?
Yes.
Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. Should I go ahead with item 6B?
Yeah, go ahead.
That is the approval of an update to the Senior Center Transportation Program funding formula. I'm really pleased to be bringing this to the board today. This has been several years in the works. For many decades, MTA has distributed 15% of their LTF funds to 5 of the Mendocino County senior centers to fund operations of their transportation programs. That's the Ukiah, Willits, Coastal Seniors, which is South Coast, Anderson Valley Senior Center, and the Redwood Coast Senior Center in Fort Bragg. The portion of that funding that each of those senior centers received was set in, I believe, 1997 and has not changed since. It was based at that time on the extent of service that each of those centers was providing. And although that has changed over the years, the formula for distributing those funds has never changed. So it's been a recommendation in the performance audit for both MCOG and MTA to revise that funding formula. And so we started that process in 2019. And at that point in time, we realized that there was a lack of consistency with reporting of data that we might use to revise a formula. And so we, MCOG, MTA, and the senior centers all worked together to standardize how that data was being reported. We then collected the reported data after a period of time and began working on some potential formula revisions. Both the senior center representatives to the Transit Productivity Committee and MCOG staff developed draft or proposed funding formulas, and those were presented to the Transit Productivity Committee in 2020. At that time, it was the start of the pandemic, and I believe we weren't even using Zoom yet. We were trying to do things via teleconference at that point, and the TPC determined that that issue was better. It's a fairly complicated issue, and we were looking at a lot of different numbers and versions of formulas, and so wanted to put that off until we had a better method for looking at those numbers as a group. So that was postponed. That item was continued to a later TPC, which actually allowed time for additional review by the senior centers. For the last 3 years, the senior center directors, we've been convening a transportation workshop for the senior center directors in the county. That's been happening annually. And so at the most recent senior center transportation workshop, they were able to review the formulas that had been developed and make a recommendation. And they actually made some adjustments and came up with an entirely new formula and recommended that formula, which was then put forward to the Transit Productivity Committee. And the TPC did recommend approval of that formula. So the recommended formula, it looks at service data. It does not factor in the performance standards that are used by MCOG each year, but it looks at number of passengers, number of service miles, and number of service hours. And in this recommended formula, 40% of the senior center funding would be distributed based on total passengers, 30% on service miles, and 30% on service hours. The idea is that, there are some centers that maybe have more concentrated client base, and so they're able to move more people around. There are other centers that serve a very large geographic area, and so maybe they're having to drive further. So by looking at all of those factors, it kind of balances that out so that the centers that have to drive a long distance to reach their clients aren't being penalized, even if they aren't able to transport as many people as those that have them in the more concentrated, in the more urbanized areas. So that was kind of the thinking behind that formula. So the formula does, unfortunately, because it is a change, there will be some centers that see an increase, and there will be some centers that see a decrease. So and I'm wondering, would it be helpful if I shared screen and showed the formulas? I'll do that. So hopefully everyone can see this. This is the formula that has been recommended by the senior center directors and by the TPC. So again, it's 40% based on passengers, 30% on miles, and 30% on service hours. This line is what using 2019 data, which is the most current full year of data that we have that was pre-pandemic. So we discussed with the group whether we should use the most current data or pre-pandemic data, and we compared them, and the changes, there was quite a variation in changes as a result of the pandemic, and so we determined that the pre-pandemic numbers would be the best to use at this point in time. So this is using the pre-pandemic data to calculate passengers, miles, and service hours. Previously, this previous share of funds line shows the percentage that each of the centers was receiving. And then this shows the change in the overall share of funding that each of the centers would have. So it is a significant change for some of the centers. Hopefully, they will have some time to adjust, and because we are currently seeing increases overall in LTF, it will help offset the decrease for those centers that will have a decrease. So the recommendation also included a method for revising the formula. So it would start with it would be implemented with the 22-23 budget year. And then this formula would be revised every 3 years using an average of the previous 3 years of data. So that allows some stability for the centers. They don't need to worry about their numbers changing every year, but also gives us an opportunity to keep the formula current, so we don't end up in another 30 years with the same imbalance of funds that we had previously. So there is a draft resolution included with the staff report, and it does include this formula and the data, which is used. This is the data, which is used to calculate the formula. And it also includes the recommendation for updating the formula. So we are asking for approval of that today via resolution, and it would then be used in the next budget process. So that concludes my staff report, and I am happy to answer any questions.
I'm not seeing it. Do we have any questions for Nafili?
Yeah, Chair Jurdy.
Oh, go ahead.
Just sorry about this question, but what's the difference between Redwood seniors and the coastal seniors?
Sure. So Redwood Coast Seniors, that's the Fort Bragg area, and then Coastal Seniors is the senior center that's based in Point Arena. So they serve the South Coast area.
Okay, thank you.
Director Brown?
Yes, thank you. I just have a comment. Sitting on the TPC, I was very impressed with the cooperation of the seniors citizen centers that got together and came up with this recommendation, and also with the staff at MCOG who helped them develop this formula. And this recommendation came from the people who were actually in the trenches doing the job, and so I think this reflects what they want. And I would like to hear public comment prior to making a motion, but I think this is the direction to go.
Okay, do we have any other board questions or comments before we go to public comment? Not seeing any. Do we have any public comment? Okay, not seeing any. Nafili, you briefly mentioned the fact that the LTF fund, the quarter-cent sales tax revenues have been increasing, and so it sort of softens the blow for the two senior centers seeing a decrease. Your example, I think, showed had the formula not changed, how the money would have been allocated, but that might be overstating the cut from previous year's allocation. Isn't that true?
It could be because the example that I used was for this current year, which had an unusual increase in LTF, and so we had held money, as you know, we had held money back in the previous budget due to uncertainty about revenues, and so this current year has not only the increase that we have been seeing, but also the funding that had been held back the previous year. So that does, I think, make the numbers look even bigger in this current year than they would typically be.
Yeah, so I guess my point is with the increase in the LTF funds, the two senior centers that are seeing a decrease due to the formula update, they may see a very nominal decrease in actual revenues from, say, 2 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And one of those senior centers, the Ukiah Senior Centers, they actually are receiving an operating grant as part of the, well, they should be receiving at least one, they have received at least one operating grant through the FTA 5310 program that was part of the CARES Act. So they'll have a little boost from that starting, they've just been, the agreements have just been approved for those. And then I believe that there was some additional funding through the ARPA Act, or maybe the first one may have been the CRISA Act rather than CARES Act. But in any case, a stimulus supplement is coming to Ukiah seniors, and then the second act may distribute that to other agencies as well.
Yeah, so it was very appropriate to update the formula based on the ground statistics that have changed over the last 20 years, and so, or 30 years. And so it's but fortuitous time to make that change.
Yes.
Okay, if we have no more questions or comments, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move adoption of the, well, I'll move approval of the resolution for the revised formula for allocating transportation, local transportation funds to senior centers.
I'll second that.
Okay, got a motion and a second. We have a roll call.
Director Brown?
Yes.
Director Connie?
Yes.
Director Albin-Smith?
Yes.
Director Haschak?
Yes.
Director Alstron?
Yes.
Chair Jordy?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so I guess that takes us to item number 7, which is the Second Amendment to the 2020 Regional Transportation Improvement Program.
Good afternoon. So before you is the Second Amendment to the 2020 RTIP. What this is doing, or proposing to do anyway, is to program the City of Willits' $144,000 of CRISA STIP funds, and they would like to put those towards their rail trail project, which is currently funded through ATP funds. And so to meet the CTC's guidelines, staff had to submit the amendment, which is attached for reference, in June, to be noticed at the August meeting and then approved at the October meeting. And before approval of the amendment, we need formal board approval. And so that's why the resolution is before you today. Are there any questions?
Do we have any questions from board members? Director Haschak.
Yeah, so I guess my question would be to Director Connie about, is this approved by the City Council of Willits?
This hasn't come to us yet, but I can't imagine anyone on the Willits City Council thinking this wasn't a good idea.
Okay.
All right. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on this item? Okay, not seeing any. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll move approval.
All right.
Brown.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We have a roll call.
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Alban Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Alstron,
Yes.
Jurdy,
Yes. Okay. Well, thanks, James, for bringing that forward. That takes us, I guess, to item 8, which would be the 2022 STIP fund estimate and RTIP.
All right, so we are now starting the process for the 2022 RTIP, and the CTC released the STIP fund estimate earlier this year. They are set to adopt it this week at their August meeting. In that fund estimate, they identified $4.89 million of available funds for the Mendocino County region. Of that money, approximately $297,000 is already sort of planned out for the PPM, planning, programming, and monitoring. They also identified a target, a maximum share of $6.767 million through the 2027-28 fiscal year. So after we deduct the $297,000 for PPM, we have a target of roughly $4.6 million with a max of just under $6.5 million. And so over the next few months, we're going to work with the TAC and the board to develop the RTIP and then bring it back in December for adoption. So going back in time a little bit to the 2020 RTIP, we identified 2 projects for future funding commitments. The first being the North State Street project for the county to do some work on some interchanges right there at, I think, Ford Road and KUKI Lane. And the other is the Gualala Downtown Streetscape project. That particular project was actually sort of a range between $1.5 million and just over $3 million. And that was dependent on active transportation funds and whether or not we were successful, or Caltrans was successful in receiving an ATP grant. So now we brought this to the board because we want to get a little direction before we go to the TAC. And so we're assuming that the county still wants to program their North State Street project. I know that it's currently underway for environmental. They have design program for this coming year. And so that project is moving along. I have yet to receive confirmation from the county DOT, but I haven't heard otherwise, and I will know for sure once I get in touch with them. Gualala, since we don't have full funds for that project, we can't program it yet because you can't partially program a component. And so the construction will cost more than $3 million. And so for now, those $3 million won't be programmed. They can just be left there as a future funding commitment. So now we sort of have 2 basic scenarios that we're hoping the board can sort of point us in the direction of. The first is going to be to, keep the future funding commitments within the target to the extent possible. So that would leave Gualala as unprogrammed, and we would program North State Street, and then that would leave some money available to open up a call for projects. The other option would be to utilize the maximum amount available in the STIP, and then program, reserve Gualala, program North State Street, and then leave a little bit left over for a smaller call for projects. And so one thing to note is that we'll probably be bringing back a request to program about 200,000 for some additional PA and ED funds for Walla. And that may either be in an amendment or just as part of the 2022 RTIP process. So now I open it up for some questions, unless I forgot something, Ophelia.
No, I don't think that you forgot anything. I will go ahead and, because I had Director Haschak asked about the Wallala project earlier, and so I had said this would be the appropriate time to discuss that, because as you can see, there is some reference to the project here. So James just mentioned that we are expecting to receive a request from Caltrans to add about $200,000. That is to complete PA and ED, which is the component in which Caltrans they complete the environmental document. And so that is what they think they need to get to a final environmental document and complete that component. There is some discussion at Caltrans, their environmental specialists there believe that they may need to recirculate the draft environmental document before that's finalized. I did have a discussion with Mr. Murphy and Youngling from GMAC a few days ago, and they had mentioned to me the same CEQA code that they mentioned, that Mr. Murphy mentioned today. And so I said that I would look into that. I have not been able to look into that yet, but I'll be looking into that. Ultimately, though, it is Caltrans' lead agency under CEQA. Regarding the design updates, I met with the project development team last week, and they have asked to present in December. They have had some staffing shortfalls on their design team, which is based out of their Marysville office. And they are now back to being fully staffed, and so have refocused efforts on this project. It is, of course, it's a delay in this particular step, but I don't believe that this represents a delay in the overall project because we are not anticipating construction for several years still. We will be seeking funding through the Active Transportation Grant Program. We are anticipating a call for projects for that program in the spring, and so we'll be working on another application at that time. So that's all I wanted to add as far as Wallala. That particular grant application, the funding, let's see, it would be so the call for projects will be in spring of 22. So the earliest year that the funding would be available for that would be 2024, I believe. So that would still be in line with the current schedule of the project.
Napili, if you don't mind me asking you a question that probably can't be answered. There's the federal transportation funds that look like they're likely to be approved.
Yes.
And have you had a chance to really give any thought to the availability of those funds? I know that the county, all the cities were looking at those funds plus some of the earlier American Rescue funds that are available on a competitive basis, both for planning and for construction. And another example that I've heard of is that the Harbor District, the city, and quite probably the county in the near future will be supporting a planning grant through the American Rescue Funds to look at that intersection and a potential road that would connect North Harbor Drive to Highway 1 on the west side of the highway, connecting the mill site, et cetera. So anyway, so I just know that there's a lot of other funding sources at play. And I'm just kind of curious, given that RTIP funds are available over a 5-year period, it's kind of a slow process to program and then access. And yet there could be these funds moving at a much faster pace with the federal funds. Have you guys had much thought in how those might interplay with each other?
So I have not considered specifically the federal stimulus or the federal infrastructure bill funds for this project. At this point, the project has been state funded. It has not, so Caltrans has been conducting CEQA only processes in their through their environmental review. So that would require some additional work, which is not to say that it couldn't be done if those funds, if federal funds became available. And certainly if there were a call for projects that seemed like it would be a good fit, we would go after this. We have not had any call for projects so far. We will, there's going to be a report later on the agenda on just a call for project concepts that Caltrans conducted that was related to the potential infrastructure funding. One other funding source, though, that has been discussed for this project is the Caltrans Complete Streets funds. So these are a fairly new source of funds that are part of the SHOP program that is Caltrans' annual funding program that they conduct a wide range of things from basic maintenance to safety improvements. Most of the things that you see happening on highways in Mendocino County are funded through the SHOP program. And they just recently created a set aside in that program for bike and ped type projects on state highways. So that is a potential, although there's been no commitment at this point.
Okay, thanks. Any questions for Nafili at this point? Or do we have any public comments at this time?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just giving a couple comments. Dan, this is Robert.
Robert, we lost your audio. If you might just blank your screen just to dedicate your bandwidth to audio.
Escape. Nothing? Dan, you can't hear me?
We're hearing you inadvertently. So maybe you could shut off your screen so we could hear you better.
Okay, let me just mention shortly that what I personally have been involved with GMAC and the Walla Streetscape planning since my tenure with GMAC started in 2003 and even prior to that. So initially my focus was on undergrounding utilities in Walla. We accomplished that in May of 2013. I hope you just the basic gist of this, I won't take too much of your time. I hope you're hearing me, but all the while, Walla GMAC and the community have been going through this decades of Walla streetscape planning and design, and monies have been, extreme amounts of money have been expended. So I believe we've arrived at a final basic design concept in alternatives 4A and 4B, and I just would like to see us go on to the next steps and for the future of Walla. We've got safety concerns. People want to see sidewalks. We want to see the speed reduced and all those kind of things, which we've all heard about many times. But I think it's really good, nice to, at some point in time, get some money going towards the engineering part, the right-of-way acquisition, and our eventual long overdue construction. So that's just what I want to add to what we've been pushing for here for quite some time now. So thanks for that little bit of time. Okay.
Thanks, Robert. Tom?
Thanks, Chairman. I just, in addition to what Robert added, I just wanted to amplify something I said in my statement earlier. And that is that we're really trying to avoid another prolonged debate in our community. The last debate that began in June 19, when Caltrans began the CEQA process, was a very divisive and bitter campaign that included professional marketing campaigns to slander and libel various people in the town. It was not healthy for our community. it did not really yield any new results. And I believe that sort of attitude will end only when MCOG and other agencies settle on a preliminary design that we can all agree to. And we have strong majorities to show what they want. We have presented Caltrans with 4 alternatives, including the one they raised in April, a couple of new ideas. We can, if they have full staff now, we could settle this in a meeting next week. We don't think any recirculation will be necessary and would oppose funding for that. We hesitate to limit funding on anything related to streetscape. However, we do not want to see Caltrans get more money to stir up more debate over things that have been settled over the last 2.5 decades. We know it. We have clear data on this already, and we don't need more. So that's really what we're saying today, I think. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing additional public comment. On my screen, it shows someone from Mendocino County, perhaps Mendocino County DOT is on the call. I thought you had a question for County DOT.
I do, but I don't see anyone from DOT on there, just from the video.
Okay, got it.
So I'll still work to get in touch with someone from there, whether it's Howard or Alicia.
Okay. Maybe a recap of what you're looking for from the board.
All right, so sort of circling back to the original topic at hand. At this point, we're just looking for some direction from the board as to how to proceed with developing the 2022 RTIP. You know, whether we just keep North State Street in there and then open up the rest of the funding for call for projects, leave Guala as a future funding commitment, or you know, leave it there under the assumption, you know, sort of the same thing, but leave North State programmed, or program North State Street, leave Guala there, and then assuming that it's going to get programmed prior to the next RTIP, which would be in 2024, and then do a smaller call for projects. Doing this option would utilize the maximum amount, essentially borrowing from the future STIP funds. So I'm just looking for some direction so I can work with the TAC.
And the reason why we are suggesting that as an option is because we know we cannot program the Guala construction funding at this point. It is going to remain a future funding commitment. And that's why the board might want to consider utilizing those future funds for that future funding commitment and making the currently available funds available for other projects.
Has the Guala project received all funding it needs for environmental planning and for engineering?
So as far as I know, engineering is fully funded. I have not heard anything about a funding shortfall in that. The additional 200,000 that we expect they will be requesting would be for the environmental component. And that could be because the future funding commitment is a range that was based on not knowing how much of the project would be ATP eligible or not. We think that we could safely tap into that existing set aside for the project to fund that request if the board wants to do that.
Director Brown?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a little confused, and there appears to be some moving parts, especially regarding the Guala project. Is it appropriate to maybe table this until our next meeting, and so that our staff could come back with more of a solid recommendation on the direction that they think that we should go? I'm just trying to unconfuse myself and maybe rely on staff a little bit more than me, especially. Thank you.
So
Can I chime in for a second? This is Greta.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I would echo that sentiment. I'm a little confused. I like the idea of making available funds available, but I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize the Gualala project. I understand their sense of urgency, having lived through the Willis bypass. So if there could just be a little more clarification as to what the two options are, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Sure.
Do
So
you want
I
to take this, Nafili, or you want me to?
Sure, I'll try to clarify. And regarding bringing this question back to the board, we could do that. The board doesn't meet again until October. MCOG doesn't typically have a September meeting, so it would put off the if the board opted to have a call for projects, it would put that off. But I think it would still be manageable. It might mean that the board wouldn't get 2 meetings to consider the draft RTIP, though, because the TAC wouldn't have had, or local agencies wouldn't have had time to apply for funds if there were a call for projects in time to have a draft RTIP ready by the November MCOG board meeting. So I'll try to clarify the 2 options. So one of the options essentially would keep us, to the extent possible, within the funding target. It would not allow any funding available to hold a call for projects for new or adding funding to other existing projects. The other option would utilize the maximum STIP share that's been identified in the fund estimate. The maximum that is identified does essentially advance part of the funding that would be available to us in the 2024 STIP. So it is advancing future funding, but it is an option that is provided to each region. As far as actual programming, it would not go into that maximum at all because the Gualala project can't be programmed at this time. So it would be future funds would remain available for future programming. But it would allow us to conduct a small call for projects for either new projects or supplementing other existing projects. And the timing is one of the reasons why we did not go to the TAC with this first, because we didn't want to necessarily ask the TAC members to go through a process of applying for funding without some direction from the board on which approach to use. I don't know if that clarified at all, but hopefully.
So it helps for me. Director Hashak?
Thank you, Chair. So, Nafeli, do you have an idea about these small projects that are out there?
I haven't heard specifically about what people might apply for, but sort of what I had in the back of my mind was that some of these existing projects, well, most of these existing projects that we have, like the county's North State Street project, Ukiah's downtown streetscape phase 2, those projects have been programmed or on the books since at least 2014. Because of the 2016 STIP funding shortfall, we actually had to delay those and in some cases deprogram those projects and then reprogram them. But the funding amounts have not changed. So the amounts that we have funded have not changed. So I had an idea that they could be available. These funds, a small call for projects, could be available to fully fund some existing projects, not necessarily new projects, although that could be an option as well. But I have not heard of any specific projects that people would apply for.
So these projects that have been on the books for quite a while could be advanced, but the Gualala project could not be advanced at this moment. So it's really trying to take care of these existing projects or the ones that have been on the books.
Correct. Without full funding for the Gualala construction project, which was at the time that we applied for the ATP grant, it was in the neighborhood of $7 million. We can't program the STIP portion because STIP guidelines say that we can't, a project component must be fully funded either through STIP or through some combination of STIP and other funds before it can be programmed.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question, Nafili, would it be possible for the TAC to submit and review the call for proposals and at the same time postpone action on whether or not to reserve these funds as unallocated, but essentially with the intent of allocating them to the Walla project or the proposals that might go to the TAC? So basically deferring the question, but still allowing the TAC to move forward with considering the other projects. So the board in October or November would have multiple options.
We could do that. It would just, we would be essentially conducting a call for projects, and then local agency staff could submit their requests for funding. Our application process is fairly simple. It's nothing like going through, a state application process. So it's not too much of a burden on them. And then they could come up with a recommendation.
So what do board members, what would they like to do? Greta, I may have cut you off. It was hard to tell if you're trying to speak because you only have audio.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I think I like that last suggestion. I mean, I hate to pass the buck, but I still feel a little iffy on making a vote or a recommendation at this point. So hearing from the TAC and hearing if any local agencies have small plan ideas, I think would be helpful before making a decision.
Any other board member questions or comments?
I also support that. I think that's an appropriate way to go at this time.
Director Alden-Smith or Director Hashak?
Well, I'm on the fence about that. It sounds like they're mutually exclusive, and we're not hurting the Gualala project by voting. That's what it sounds like to me. Maybe I'm confused. So I'd like to see things move forward rather than put them off. But I can be convinced either way.
And I'm in the same boat as Tess is, that it seems like if we can move forward and it's not putting off the Walla project at all, then we should just go ahead and do that.
So I think that if it's the board's preference to see what the local agencies recommend, we could do it in a fairly timely manner. We wouldn't necessarily need to wait for a TAC meeting to notify the agencies about the potential availability of funding. And so we could have a discussion with them about projects. We could have them select projects or make a recommendation possibly as early as their October TAC meeting.
Okay, Nafili, and if that were to happen, then it would be back on the board's agenda for November?
Yes, we could have then a draft RTIP on the board agenda in November and have action in December.
Okay. And that would meet the deadline?
Yes, the deadline, the due date to the CTC is to Caltrans and CTC is December 15th. So because our meetings are at the beginning, typically at the beginning of the month, we'll be in plenty of time.
That sounds good.
Okay. Then I think maybe we'll just record this as direction of the board. I don't know if it really takes a vote, but just direction of the board to proceed with that process and have the TAC receive and consider proposals and then make a recommendation back to the board.
Okay, yes, we will do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see, that takes us to presumably item number 9. Scrolling through the agenda here. I guess it takes us consent calendar, which is approval of the June 3rd minutes, approval of the Transit Productivity Committee minutes of July 21st, and approval of the first amendment of the fiscal year 21-22 Transportation Overall Work Program. Do we have any public comments on the consent calendar? Okay, not seeing any. Would someone like to make a motion on the consent calendar?
Move approval.
I second that.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Can we have roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Austrian,
Was that me? I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, and Jody?
Yes. Okay, now we're going to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee and reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. Do we have a motion to ratify the actions of the Policy Advisory Committee?
I so move.
Second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Can we have roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Jody?
Yes. All right, well, that takes us to informational reports. We have Caltrans projects update and information.
I don't really have any updates. We will be providing an updated project status list at the meeting that we have with the RTPAs tomorrow. So in the next board package, we'll have an updated project list. But if anybody has any questions, I could, try to take that back to whoever it needs to go to.
Okay, Tasha, the meeting you have tomorrow, you said it's with the regional, is it with the executive directors, people like Nafili?
Yeah, I think when we first started preparing those reports, there was some confusion about how often they would be provided, but I was able to confirm with Jen Buck, who's the project manager, that she's going to be providing those lists on a quarterly basis, which is in line with a meeting that we have with the RTPA directors.
Yes, so those are quarterly meetings with the District 1 directors and District 1 Caltrans management.
Okay, got it. So then if it's provided tomorrow, then it would be at we would get a copy then, I guess, at our October meeting?
Or I'm sure sooner if you wanted to see that.
Okay, all right, thanks. Okay, well then that takes us to, are there any questions or comments on Caltrans District 1? One thing I would say, just having traveled through Oregon and Washington vacation, we have substantially safer highways, but in my opinion, in that we have turn pockets all over the place, which I appreciate. And for some reason in Oregon and Washington, I noticed very, very few turn pockets, even on relatively busy stretches of Highway 101. So I was surprised that they don't seem to deploy those very often to let traffic, kind of stay protected. Anyway, If there are other questions or comments, Mendocino Transit Authority.
I have nothing at this time.
Okay. MCOG, we have your summary of meetings. Anything else you would like to add?
Nothing to add to the summary of meetings, but I'm happy to answer questions about any specific items.
Director Hashak.
Thank you, Chair. You skipped the North Coast Railroad Authority.
You're right. Go ahead.
If you'd like, I could report. We didn't have a meeting since the last MCOG meeting, but we did have a couple. I was invited to the Hopland MAC, and also we convened a meeting of the landowners from Dos Rios up to the Humboldt border in the Eel River Canyon. There were about 60 people we invited, about 25 showed up. Both of those discussions were about the conversion of the railroad to the Great Redwood Trail and people's concerns and interests and support and complaints and everything in between. So I think it was a information sharing a lot of, and Senator McGuire's office was on the calls with the Eel River Canyon people, and so I think it's a good step in keeping the communication open for all the stakeholders along the rail line.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that update. Loretta?
If I could just add on the NCRA discussion, the bill that we're tracking, Senate Bill 69, some of you may know that it's made it through the Senate and it's now in the Assembly, and the next hearing is August 19th. So that is the bill that, continues on the process that was started with a follow-up to the original bill. And that bill is going to be wrapping up soon. We're at the end of the legislative process pretty soon. So just an update on that.
All right, thanks. Okay. Well, then I guess that takes us to administrative staff. We've got the innovative concepts proposal by the Biden administration.
Yeah, so this is what I mentioned earlier in the meeting about Caltrans requesting project concepts in preparation for potential federal infrastructure funding. So it's not unusual. This has happened before when there's been an expected chunk of money coming out of the federal government. The state will prepare project lists, or they will ask regional agencies for project lists. So in this case, they asked for innovative concept proposals. And these were meant to be project concepts that did not require previous planning, but could include previous planning, and were projects that, or concepts that fit within specific categories. So in your packet, you have a fact sheet on the program itself and copies of what was submitted to Caltrans. So we, MCOG staff, coordinated with local agencies who also had an opportunity to submit project concepts to determine what should ultimately be submitted, and we put in a total of 6 project concepts. So these are all projects that do not have actual infrastructure funding secured at this point. Some of them have had some degree of prior planning done, and some have not. Because this was a very, simplified submittal process and not tied to any actual funding, there was a lot of flexibility. So we were able to put things in that still needed some study as well as infrastructure. But the projects that were submitted, and some of these are more innovative than others. Some of them are just innovative for a rural area. But we submitted the Brick Trails second access, mobility solutions in rural communities. And so that would be to fund services that will be studied in our planning grant. The Noyo Harbor Multimodal Improvement Project, which we did coordinate with City of Fort Bragg, and I believe that they put in a corresponding proposal on this one. The Orchard Avenue Extension phases 1 and 2, and so these would be the project concepts that came out of the county's recent feasibility study. Rail trail to Mendocino College, and this would actually be an extension of the existing rail trail to Ford, and then utilizing Ford and North State Street to get to Mendocino College at this point. And a Mendocino Transit Authority Transit Center in the Ukiah area. So those are the project concepts that were submitted. It was a fairly quick turnaround on these, so we were not able to get board recommendations on them. But again, because it's not tied to real funding at this point, and we're not sure what will ultimately come of this, it allowed us to put forward a variety of ideas. So the next step in the process is that Caltrans will be reviewing all of these, and they'll be reaching out, following up with all of these submitting agencies. Whether or not they get put forward by Caltrans is unknown, but is my understanding that even if these projects are not funded at this time, they will be maintaining a list. So could still be on the books for future funding that comes up. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that, and hopefully we'll hear more in the future about what might become of these.
Well, first of all, thanks for submitting that on a quick turnaround, it sounds like you. And hopefully running up some of these up the flagpole results in some interest in Sacramento and in DC. Do we need questions? Okay, all right. I guess, do you have something else, Nafili?
No, we just wanted to report on that. These were all they had to be consistent with the California Transportation Plan and the recent Climate Action Plan that was approved by the state. So these are all sort of outside of what we would, well, those plans are looking for projects that are different than the standard project. So hopefully some of these will fit into their what they're looking for.
Okay, great.
Nafili,
Mm-hmm.
can I make a comment? This is Greta.
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate these proposals, and I especially appreciate that they really cover a broad range of the county. I just, I think a lot of us up here in North County often feel like we're on the edge of things, and I really appreciate that you've got a couple of proposals in there that do cover our region. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad it was a pretty broad range of types of projects and geographically. So, and I don't know if any of the local agencies also put in proposals. I know City of Fort Bragg did, but even if they're not funded, it is my hopes that at least it puts things on the state's radar.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. And the next report?
So I don't have any miscellaneous.
Okay, does that take us, I'm having a tough time monitoring the agenda while we're looking at the
Yes,
screen here.
so-
Go to planning next.
Yes, planning reports.
Thank you. I have a couple of reports I want to update you on some planning projects we're working on. So the first one is on the 2022 Regional Transportation Plan and Active Transportation Plan update. We've reported to you, I believe, monthly over the last few months to tell you how we're doing. So we've now completed the initial needs assessment and information gathering phase, which was conducted mainly through social pinpoint, and we advertised it widely through email lists, press releases, flyers, social media. We made a presentation at a tribal meeting. We made a presentation at the Westport, the Round Valley, the Redwood Valley, and the Laytonville Municipal Advisory Council meetings, as well as the County Climate Action Advisory Committee meeting. So we're taking the input gathered into account in working on the different elements. The TAC is starting to review some of the different components. So our timeline is that we anticipate having the draft available for posting to MCOG's website for the second round of public outreach in September and October. And then with presentation of the draft to the TAC and MCOG in November, and then being put on the MCOG December agenda for action. If needed, if the MCOG board wanted more time for review, it could be continued to February. The timeline is tight, but the current RTP expires on a weekend, and then the following Monday would be the MCOG meeting. So that's possible, especially if the board wanted more time in reviewing the environmental documents. So just to recap, we expect to bring the draft to you in November and the final in December. And we anticipate a negative declaration on the RTP, so hopefully that will be fine. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
All right, well, thanks, Loretta. Any questions for Loretta?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Uh-huh.
Loretta, I just wanted to say everywhere I looked, it seemed like I was running into this survey. So I really appreciate how thorough you were in reaching out and getting public input. It's so difficult during these COVID times, it seems, to engage the public, but I think that you should be commended. You had this everywhere, so thank you so much for your effort.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Are you ready for me to go on to the, I'm sorry, are you ready for the next report?
I think so, it looks like it.
Okay, so this is just an update on the local road safety plans. As we've reported in the past, MCOG, for the benefit of local agencies, conducted one combined procurement process to get a consultant under contract to prepare individual local road safety plans for each of the 4 cities and the county. This was a Caltrans grant-funded project matched with local funds from each agency. And the consultant firm that we've been working with is TJKM, and that firm recently finished the first round of 5 virtual stakeholder workshops, one held for each jurisdiction. I know some of you were involved in those workshops. So that project's moving forward. The next steps include the consultant working with local staff to identify the emphasis areas, and then they'll be conducting field reviews and developing countermeasures. So the project's on track. Local agency staff has been engaged in it, and I know some of you have been seeing those draft documents to review. And the budget information that I presented. So this was the original budget last year that was carried forward to the current work program. And one thing I see that I didn't put in here, last year's work program included the $8,000 for MCOG staff, which we expended with procurement and then just coordination. So the current year's work program, which is not included in the total there, the current year's budget includes an additional $7,500 for MCOG staff in that budget. So anyway, that project's on track, and it's expected to wrap up in the spring. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Not seeing any questions for you, Loretta.
Okay. And then finally, this is our announcement about the Caltrans grant that we were recently awarded. We are very pleased to learn that our mobility solutions for rural communities of inland Mendocino County feasibility study was awarded by Caltrans. And I was reviewing some information this morning, and it looked like we were one out of, there were about 3 times the number of grants received that were funded. So about 1/3 of what was received was funded. So I'm happy that we were in that group of awarded projects. And the project description, I believe I put on your staff report, and it's just a paragraph or 2 that I'll read to you. This study will research mobility solutions and transit alternatives existent in the marketplace that have been implemented in other locations for applicability in our region. The study will look at developing innovative solutions, including pilot projects, to meet the mobility needs of these remote communities. Various public engagement tools will be utilized for community outreach. So basically, we're just going to look at solutions that have been implemented elsewhere that might work in our rural community. And the communities to be studied are Covelo, Laytonville, Brook Trails, Hopland, and Potter Valley. And it's just, just to kind of review, because we're such a large rural community with several outlying areas that are unable to be served by traditional transit, we need to come up with some ideas that will work for these communities. We hear about it in the unmet needs process every year, but it's just not reasonable to serve like Covelo and some of these areas with traditional transit. So this is the first step at getting to get some of those solutions identified. So the schedule for the approved grant is that we expect to start the procurement process to hire a consultant to do this work. We'll be starting that in September and October, and it usually takes a couple months to get a consultant on board. And then once we have a consultant on board, the timeline for the grant is that it's about a 1-year project, so it will carry over to the next fiscal year. So we're very happy about it, and we look forward to working on this project.
Thanks, Laura.
Any questions?
Just a question. When would board members maybe get a chance to meet with or speak with the consultant? Because, for example, the way that I see us meeting unmet needs in the more remote areas is one way or the other getting an existing vendor like an Uber or a Lyft some sort of subsidy so they could go out and find and recruit drivers. I know that MTA years ago had attempted to get MTA certified drivers in vehicles, and for one reason or another, it didn't work in Round Valley and Laytonville. But it seems like those private sector businesses have figured out a way to find drivers and get them meeting certain standards. It just seems like even if it just took us a little subsidy from us to get those companies to offer services in the rural areas, they could become feeders for the MTA in the more urbanized areas. So anyway, that's where I see us meeting needs for people who don't have vehicles but need mobility.
Well, we'll definitely expect the consultant to be doing outreach with stakeholders, and we can certainly include you in those meetings. And it's got a pretty good budget. We think by the virtue of the fact that it's about a $200,000 project, that should provide a good amount of time to do some thorough outreach. So we'll definitely keep that in mind.
All right, Director Hashak.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Loretta for pursuing this grant. And I think that there are lots of unmet needs, especially in the 3rd district in these more remote communities that we need to start thinking, all sorts of alternative ways of meeting those needs. And I think that this is a great step forward. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other
And that's all
questions.
I have. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions and comments, then I guess you also have the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant? Or is that you just addressed that?
Yes, yes.
Do you have any miscellaneous?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any MCOG director comments? Okay. California Association of Council of Government. I think Tess is our delegate, maybe. She had to leave at 3 o'clock with another appointment. If not, then I guess that concludes today's meeting, 3/11, and we will get back together in October.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of
Bye-bye.
the summer.